This referendum is the people versus the establishment.
The craziness that's going on with the migration, with people pouring in all over the place, I think that Britain will end up separating from the EU.
This is our cue. This is our chance. This is our moment.
We can vote to put power back in the hands of people.
They say we can't do it. We say we can. They say we have no choice but to bow down to Brussels. We say they are woefully underestimating this country.
We can vote to put power back in the hands of people. We can vote to take control of our country back. We can vote to get our borders back. We can vote to get our pride and self-respect as a nation and in who we are as a people back.
The miners in Lancashire are to be instructed to join the strike, despite the fact that they voted by almost 6-4 against a strike.
Alongside the rest of the world, we were evolving rapidly. Improvements in transportation and an increased willingness to engage in international trade made overseas production and mining not only possible, but profitable.
I think the reality of the situation was that it wasn't in the UK's best interest to protect an industry which, from a domestic perspective, wasn't efficient to keep maintaining. And the consequence was a huge amount of unemployment that was generated in these industries.
We're very concerned about unemployment because our jobs are constantly under threat. The 3 million or so already fully unemployed.
I don't think enough was done to rehabilitate those who had lost their jobs or to retrain them and make sure that they were ready for alternative kinds of employment.
If you look at the UK now, a lot of the regional inequality we have does stem back from that poor transition from like quite the industrial heartlands to where we are now.
The result were towns instantly impoverished, with no opportunities for young or old people, isolated from the rest of the country. People that were previously middle class and economically stable now struggled, living paycheck to paycheck, and they were angry.
Rioters have been fighting running battles with police tonight. The police now say 341 people have been arrested after a demonstration ended in violence.
What do you do to take the pressure off your back if you're responsible for hundreds of thousands of people struggling to get by? You blame someone else.
Non-white immigration.
Immigration is too high.
Immigration.
Migration. Uncontrolled immigration.
Lots of Muslims.
The Eastern Europeans.
It's all these foreigners coming in.
The Muslimic infidel.
My view, having grown up and lived and worked all my life in incredibly multicultural area, that's Birmingham, worked in the city centre, lived in the suburbs and brought up my children, sent them to schools in the middle of Birmingham and spent a lot of time in that community, is that we do not live in a racist country. We live in one of the most tolerant and open societies that I've experienced in the world. And people come to this country because they respect our values of openness, tolerance, freedom of speech, and the law of the land. Those are things that are beacons for people around the world. And those are British values, and I'm proud of them.
It's easier for us, psychologically, to imagine that the main obstacle for us is some foreign group or some foreign thing like the EU. That's easier than us saying it's a problem with us, with our society.
When you look at the evidence of what immigration has done for the UK, it's difficult to argue that immigration has been of net harm. So then you ask, why do people have an issue with immigration if it's not from the economic perspective?
What is interesting is that when you look at some of the polls recording how people voted in the 2016 referendum, you find higher levels of xenophobia, often in regions where you don't have much in the way of migrants, so where people don't have contact. And that speaks to prejudice.
The only people I do have problems with are Negroes. And I don't know why. A friend of mine said, what would you do if I invited you to dinner and I put you next to... I said, I wouldn't be there. Simple as that. I said, I wouldn't be there.
It's time Tell on more just where to go by voting BNP. All sorts of diverse cultures around our country roam. Refusing to adopt our ways, it's time to send them home. It's time for hope and action to set our people free. Tell on more just where to go by voting BNP.
This support for parties, such as BNP and UKIP, got so strong that the political mainstream couldn't ignore it anymore. David Cameron was in the middle of a disastrous coalition with Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats, which saw their popularity plummet and Labour gaining a 10-point lead in the polls. It looked impossible for the Conservatives to get a majority in 2015, but Cameron had a trick up his sleeve. UKIP's support was at an all-time high thanks to the party's commitment to leaving the EU. So David Cameron knew if he could swing UKIP voters to the Conservatives in 2015, he could win.
We will give the British people a referendum with a very simple in or out choice.
It is 10 o'clock, the polls have closed, the general election is over, and our exit poll is predicting that the Conservatives are the largest party.
It worked. David Cameron got the majority he needed. But I wonder if he knew, when he stood outside number 10, that he wouldn't be there for long. The referendum was officially called 10 months later, in February 2016. Cameron was then faced with the task of convincing the nation that the referendum he had just called was a terrible idea to vote for.
I believe we'll be better off in a reformed Europe.
Team Remain started strongly. An array of celebrities publicly expressed their support for the EU, hoping to convince the nation to stay in Europe. David Beckham, Gary Lineker, Stephen Hawking, Karen Brady, Elton John, Alan Sugar, Daniel Craig, and hundreds more all came out in support of Remain. Even Barack Obama stood next to David Cameron and sang the EU's praises.
And the United Kingdom is at its best when it's helping to lead a strong Europe.
Their strategy was simple. They would centre their campaigning around protecting the economy, and it made sense. One of the biggest benefits of remaining in Europe was our ability to freely trade with EU countries. In the other camp, things were looking less positive. Two groups fought to be the primary campaigning body, the UKIP-backed Leave.eu and Vote Leave, which was mostly composed of Eurosceptic Conservatives. However, on the 13th of April, the Electoral Commission announced that Vote Leave would be the official campaign. The tides then began to turn for the Leavers because two men saw an opportunity, and they seized it. They knew that if Leave won, Cameron would have to step down, which was their chance to move into some real estate they'd been eyeing up for a while.
Boris Johnson, I mean, gets quite a lot of political flack about, sort of being a bit bumbling and not with it. But I think he can relate to people in the same way that Nigel Farage could relate to people.
These two political heavyweights humanised the Leave campaign and changed the perception that Leavers were all racist and far right. But this didn't solve the problem that Vote Leave were facing.
We landed our economic message like an atomic weapon. We pushed the Leave campaign from Norway to Canada to Albania, and then finally pushed them entirely off the single market. Of course, what it meant is that that was the moment when they decided to adopt Nigel Farage's approach to this referendum and to make it all about immigration.
Remain, however, were against debating the topic of immigration, as they saw free movement to be the public's least favourite aspect of EU membership.
It's about 2.5 million people currently work in the UK from the EU. 69% already have jobs lined up before they even come here, which just shows you that the argument that workers from the EU come here to live off the state and live off benefits doesn't seem to hold much weight when you look at the empirical evidence. The Remain campaign, I don't think, did enough to provide the empirical evidence of what the real benefits are. And there's been lots of studies done which show that EU migration has been of net benefit.
This allowed the Leave campaign to flood the internet and the streets with misinformation. False statistics and lies convinced the public that leaving the EU would solve all the problems this country has been facing.
State-of-the-art hospitals, hundreds of new schools, pioneering health and scientific research. We could build new roads and improve the railways, expand regional airports. and we could lower taxation.
With the Remain campaigners, I don't think they fully understood the different issues that different regions of the UK were feeling and the kind of sentiment at the time.
The weekend before the referendum, I was on the South Bank, and that's where I saw a large number of the Remain team that were handing out leaflets. They were not going to these deprived pockets. They were not taking themselves out of their own comfort zone and to places where the battle was really going to be fought.
The Remain argument was stay as we are or risk uncertainty, and it's an argument that I happened to personally agree with. But if you've got nothing, why would you vote for things to stay as they are? At least with uncertainty, there's some hope that things might change.
As the campaign progressed, Vote Leave became more and more direct with their message.
They subtly turned the nation xenophobic.
Während sich Teile von ihnen in den großen Städten, Verkehrs- und Handelszentren des Mittelmeerraumes festsetzen, geht die Wanderung anderer Teile rastlos weiter über Spanien, Frankreich, Süddeutschland und England.
Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia and Turkey join the EU.
Im gesamten Rauschgifthandel der Welt 34%. An Kassendiebstählen 47%. An Falsch- und Glücksspielvergehen 47%.
Led to up to 5,000 jihadis coming into the European Union. We may as well put a sign on the southern beaches of Europe saying terrorists welcome.
Es kam die Zeit, da man sich nur dann mit Stolz zum Deutschen bekennen durfte.
Don't believe those who talk Britain down, who say we're too weak to control our own affairs.
In uns selbst allein liegt die Zukunft des deutschen Volkes.
We want to take back control.
To take back control.
Let's take control.
Bombarding the people with messages like this caused mass violence towards Jewish people in Nazi Germany. That would never happen in Britain though. Could it?
It's hell, it's chaos, it stabs people and shot people.
1 week before the referendum, a pro-EU MP was on her way to a meeting with her constituents when she was shot and stabbed multiple times by Thomas Mayer. An eyewitness at his trial later testified that he shouted, "This is for Britain. Britain will always come first." Mayer was found to have had links with the neo-Nazi group, the National Alliance, and hundreds of Nazi books were discovered at his home. In 1991, Thomas Mayer sent a letter to a pro-apartheid magazine in South Africa, in which he said, "Despite everything, I still have faith that the white race will prevail, both in Britain and in South Africa. But I fear that it's going to be a long and very bloody struggle." The killer has been documented to have had far-right views for decades, so what drove him to attack specifically in 2016? Maybe he had seen the messages from the Leave campaign. Maybe they inspired him. One thing was clear, this had all gone too far.
But last, let me say this. Batley and Spen will go on to elect a new MP, but no one can replace Mother.
On the 23rd of June, we voted to leave the EU by a majority of over 1 million. Democracy won. But at what cost? The pound collapsed, the economy in decline, hate crimes on the rise, far-right groups across Europe gaining support, and the death of a woman who was serving her country. We don't know what will happen in the future, or if we are even definitely leaving. The only thing that's now clear, this had been a long time coming.